Gig Gab, episode 431 for Monday, May 27th, Old Time Player Piano Day, 2024. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians. Our sponsor for today is Bandzoogle, where you can go, bandzoogle.com. You try it free for 30 days, and then you get to use the promo code giggabpod, all one word, to get 15% off your first year's subscription. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. For now, here in Durham, New Hampshire, I'm Dave Hamilton, and it's just me today, folks. It's been almost exactly 6 months since we had a one-on-one chat here like this, and I figured it was time. We've been through a lot of guests. I want to talk about some of the things that we've all learned from, kind of debrief a little bit from our guests. We've got some Gig Gab to talk about. We have some, maybe a new segment, tools of the trade, tricks of the trade. I don't know. We've got something cooking there. I think I said we had some Gig Gab. We have other podcasts to listen to that you folks have recommended, lots from the mailbag. And I've been playing some gigs. And so I want to talk about all of that. The first thing and the overarching question that I have for you here is, what do you want from me? What do you like from Gig Gab that you've heard? What do you feel is missing? So I'm going to be asking for a lot of feedback during this episode, but don't worry. I'm going to give you ideas of what to tell me. You're going to send it in to feedback@giggabpodcast.com. You can comment on the YouTube videos. You can comment on the Facebook posts. You can comment on Twitter, like where X, sorry, wherever you want to do all that. Like, I get it all. It's totally fine. And of course, I can get stuff to our guests. I can get stuff to Paul. So he and I actually still stay in touch very regularly. We just don't do this because the schedules never work. But yeah, I want to know what you've liked. Let's debrief together, right? So this is just you and me here. I realized, I mentioned this when I was talking to Mike Schulte a few episodes ago, that when I brought my drum set to the theater, Seacoast Rep Theater, for load-in for the production of Spring Awakening that I'm still in the midst of. It will have just ended by the time this episode comes out. But when I loaded my drums in there, which was either very late April or early May, probably early May, it was the first time I had put my drum set in my car since New Year's Eve. It was the first time I'd played a gig on my drum set since New Year's Eve. I'd played one Monkey Fist gig in January, where I used that pitch slap, the stand, kind of the wearable cajon that we cooked together. And I had a lot going on in my life, a lot of business stuff, a lot of business travel, a little bit of personal travel throughout kind of the winter and the first several months of the year. But still, it kind of shook me a little bit, and I started doing a little reflection, like, wait a minute, what do I need to do to fix that? Because going 5 months without playing a gig-ish, 4 months if you count the Monkey Fist gig at the end of January, that's not, don't like that. And so, I started thinking about why that was. And I've had two bands that basically have reached what I'll call their logical conclusions, right? Uptown Celebration, the wedding band that I played in, really never recovered from COVID lockdowns, right? That band was cooking. Then COVID, of course, stopped all of that. When we came back out of COVID, the same band members were not all available. So we brought in some new people, brought in some old people, but no one was on the same page. And Gary, the guitar player, who also the band leader, got to a point where he was frustrated with trying to herd cats, which I know we all understand. And so he officially, again, put an end to that back in the fall. Will it come back someday? Perhaps. I don't know, right? But there was no big implosion or anything. It was just like, hey, here we are. And he has other things going on with his business too. So, but he started a new business and all that stuff. So that band reached its logical conclusion, and Fling, in a sense, suffered the same fate. We never really successfully relaunched after COVID lockdowns. That was a byproduct of several sort of convening factors. Our bass player changed. The new bass player that we have, my friend Jamie, fantastic, but his schedule, because of all his work at the theater, makes coordinating things tough. And Fling's direction also changed. So there's a lot of focus on original music. We're still actively doing that and recording and all of those things. But in terms of a gigging band, Fling is not that, really. We did just play one gig, which I'll talk about. But, if we play 2 gigs a year as Fling, that'll probably, I think this year officially we have 3 scheduled, and I don't think we will add any more. And one of them may not happen later in the year. So, and another band we would put kind of another band in that slot. So I started wondering, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Usually what would happen for me is, or what has happened, is bands just sort of come and go, but the bands had not been arriving. And I started thinking about that. Why? Do I suck? Do people not like hanging with me? Like, is there a reason for this? And the reason that I came to, which it turns out was at least partially correct, is that I had gotten to a point where anytime anybody called me for anything, I had to politely decline. I was too busy. My schedule was too full to take on these other things. And you do that for 5 to 8 years, and guess what? People stop calling because why bother? It's like, well, Dave's too busy. So I had to reset that institutional knowledge. And I didn't want to immediately sort of jump out and kind of, hang my shingle in a public way and, start having to filter through all of that stuff. I figured, well, if I can find something where it's with people I already know, that's going to be perhaps an easier scenario. So before I hung my shingle, and I still haven't, I don't think I will, I sent a text message out to maybe 8, 10, 12 musician friends that either I've played with or that I know, and basically shared a condensed version of what I just shared here. That, I'm still in Bitter Pill, love playing in that band, but we play so sporadically that, I'll go 5 months without a gig. And that doesn't, like that. I worry about a lot of things for that. Mental health being one of them, because that's a good thing for me. Playing is a really good thing for me, and as I know that it is for a lot of us. So so I said, look, I'm still playing in Bitter Pill. My other 2 bands reached their logical conclusions, COVID lockdowns, everything I just explained. And while I certainly can fill in my schedule with theater gigs, I don't want that to become my primary thing. It never really has been. It's always kind of been a thing that I can do. And when the conditions are right, I actually enjoy doing. But those conditions aren't right all the time. And the conditions really are, I've got to enjoy the music at some level. The band, I don't like being in a hidden pit. I like the band being on stage so that I can see the other people that I'm performing with, the actors, singers, and the dancers and all that stuff. That energy is something I feed off of, right? I like that. And I also don't like a theater show that has to run 7, 8 shows a week for 6 weeks straight. Like that just doesn't fit in my schedule. So that rules out a lot. So there's 1 or 2 theater shows a year that sort of show up on my doorstep, and if the timing is right for it, that fit all those criteria, then I'll take it. But otherwise, no. And I like playing like regular, like band gigs, and I like being in a band. And so sent out that note, and that was only like a week and a half ago. I now, for the month of June alone, which is just upon us here, I have 6 gigs scheduled with 5 different bands. So I definitely have some options out there, and I'm looking forward to rekindling, sort of playing with some musicians that I haven't played with in like a decade. I'm going to be playing with my friend Jack Reed. He was the bass player in that knockoff band that I was in, and we did some trio gigs. He has another trio now that sort of needs a drummer, and so I'll play. I got 1 gig with him, a couple of gigs with our friend Dave Brunyak, aka Dallas Corbin from Heartland Radio. I got a couple of those coming up. A couple of Bitter Pill gigs, so some things happening. Mix up the pot a little bit. I probably have overdone it somewhat, but that's okay. We'll regulate. We'll get there. And of course, gives me lots of stories to tell when I'm here with all of you. In fact, I did just play a Fling gig, and I made a rookie mistake that I have no excuse in making. I played the gig without in-ears. Now, of all the bands I'm in, Fling is probably the worst one to do this with, because I sing harmonies. I sing on every song. I'm either singing harmonies or I'm singing leads. And I realized that doing that with a monitor wedge, I had forgotten what that was like. And I don't like it. The reason I chose not to use ears, it was a multi-band bill. We got there. There was a 6 o'clock load-in sound check for a 7 o'clock downbeat, and Fling was the first band up, which I always like on a multi-band bill. I like being the first band up because it means we actually get a real sound check. Whereas if you're playing in the middle or even at the end of the evening, oftentimes, no. Little pro tip there. But anyway, it worked out that we were the opening band of the night, which was great. So we got there, 5:45, because I'd never played this particular club before and wanted to make sure I, understood what was going on. And we were using the headliner's drums, so I wanted to kind of negotiate that and figure out what of his drums I was using, if I was bringing my snare drum, stool, kick pedal, cymbals, like what permutation of all that. So get there 5:45 or whatever, and we were the first ones there. Headliner band wasn't there yet. Sound engineer wasn't there. Okay, great. But that's fine. Kind of expected. Band headliner showed up 5-10 minutes later. Like they were, perfectly on time and all of that stuff. And that sort of introduction and negotiation went very, very well. Okay, great. Let me help you with this, yada, yada. Well, now it's like, 6:20, 6:30, and maybe 6:35, the sound engineer shows up. It's like, okay, well, now we're playing the game against the clock. What's going on? And great engineer, very capable, nice guy. He did not know that he was doing sound until he got off of his day job at 5:58 p.m. So there was no way that he was going to be there at 6 o'clock for our load-in and sound check. So out of compassion, I opted not to do the, hey, can I get an XLR feed or a 1/4-inch feed, either one. Be ready for both, folks. If you are doing this, always be able to take whatever signal the house sends you for your ears. 1/4-inch XLR, and XLR in both directions. I've gotten both male and female XLRs from the house. And so have all the adapters at the ready so that you can be the lowest friction guy, right? Or lowest friction person on the gig. So, but I never asked him that because things were moving very, very quickly. There was already a monitor wedge back behind the drums. It was actually, the way it was positioned was like the worst. It was to the left of the hi-hat. I don't mean like behind the hi-hat. I mean, it was like my line of sight. If I looked down at the monitor wedge, basically would have to look through the snare drum and the hi-hat to see the monitor wedge. So it was in a terrible spot. Like, it would have been better if it could have been moved behind me so that there was nothing in between it and my head, but that was not how things worked out. So and then we got to the point where we were line checking things, and it was at that point that I realized, oh man, I absolutely could have asked him for a feed. It wouldn't have been a big deal. It would have totally worked. It would have added very little friction to the whole scenario, and that was my rookie mistake. Obviously, made it through the gig. I'm still here. we're not saving lives out there. But and I listened back, and actually harmonies were in tune, and like, for the most part, and all that stuff. But it's like, why did I do this to myself? I did learn, and this was the part that I liked the least. Prior to using in-ears, I always wore earplugs at gigs, and I'd gotten used to singing and blending harmonies with earplugs. I no longer have that skill. I cannot do it, or I did not do it at that gig with earplugs. I played the gig without any hearing protection. It was a 50-minute set, 45-minute set, not quiet on stage. It wasn't terribly loud, but we were in the I was pushing 90, 95 dB back behind the drums, as you might imagine, especially with a monitor wedge there. So that's not a healthy thing. I need to somehow, I guess, figure out how to play with earplugs and a monitor wedge, just so that I have the confidence of doing that in a scenario if I find myself in that again. But so that's where we were. That's the gigs we've had. What gigs have you had? And right now I'm in the midst of playing this Spring Awakening theater show and a couple of Bitter Pill gigs. In fact, I'm recording this on Thursday, just before Memorial Day weekend, so on the 23rd. And we're in the midst of 7 performances of Spring Awakening, which will wrap up on Sunday with a 2 p.m. downbeat. And then I have an 8 p.m. downbeat on the other side of the same town in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, with Bitter Pill. So technically our load-in is at 5. I don't think I'm going to make that, but I'll be there close enough, and we'll make it happen. But what gigs are you playing? Feedback at giggabpodcast.com. What stories do you have? What lessons have you learned? I would love to hear from you about all of that. And it's nice to have some gig stories to share. That was part of my little litmus test of when I realized I hadn't, brought my drums anywhere. I was like, wait a minute, this is not good. So it's a problem in the process of being solved, perhaps already solved. So that was good. But yeah, what kind of gigs are you playing? Feedback, giggabpodcast.com. Put the @ in the spot where it belongs, and everything's good. We have had some fantastic guests, in my opinion. Of course, I'm the one that selects them. So at least ultimately. So hopefully I think they're fantastic. We've had a couple of interesting things that I want to talk about, but for the most part, great people, all great people, really. And some great lessons from recent guests. The one that absolutely stands out to me, and maybe it's recency bias, but I don't think it is Gig Gab 429 a couple of weeks ago. We had Robert Scovill on, and obviously, I'm not going to summarize everything that we talked about because we'd be here forever. But the main takeaway that I have from that I'm really eager to put into action and test out is that idea of delaying the mains. And by that I mean, and he meant, because this was his lesson that he sort of taught all of us, he was talking about how it started with Tom Petty. He's still doing it now with Kenny Chesney, that he basically sets up a separate PA for the people in the front, 6 to 8 rows or something, because they're not going to get a good mix if all you have is the big line arrays for the whole either arena or stadium now. So he sets up this separate PA. But what he talked about was even that separate PA for the first 6 to 8 rows, which if it doesn't click, is basically what most of us are doing. We only do the first 6 or 8 rows. We don't have to worry about the stadium, right? So, but he said he would delay the sound coming out of those mains to match when the sound of whatever the sort of dominant acoustic instrument on stage, when that would hit, because sound travels, slower than light, right? So, if the snare drum is 15 feet upstage, right, from where the mains are hanging at the edge of the stage, and you've got the vocals and all the other instruments and maybe even some snare drum coming out of your mains, it means that your snare drum is going to hit on stage. It's going to come out of the mains, but the sound from the drum itself isn't going to reach the spot of the mains at the same time. It's going to be delayed. It's going to take it It's about 1 millisecond per foot. It's actually slightly less than that, but rule of thumb, 1 millisecond per foot. So if it's 15 feet upstage, well, you've got 15 milliseconds before that snare drum sound hits where the mains are, but it's already left the mains. It's already hit people's ears. So now you've got these sounds hitting people, 15 milliseconds apart. 15 milliseconds is basically imperceptible if you're listening for it, but it's not imperceptible in terms of your brain processing this information. And when it's out of sync like that, not only does your brain have problems, but it actually creates, as he mentioned, a comb filter, which can make the sound wrong, even though you're not quite sure why. It's a chorusing kind of effect that kind of can happen, and it can sort of negate things, and it's a mess. And so the idea is delay the sound coming out of your mains to match the delay that's going to happen naturally, acoustically in the room, so that in this example, when that snare drum 15 feet away hits the front of the stage, that's when you want the sound to come out of your mains. And again, because it's basically imperceptible, people watching you on stage sing or hit the snare drum or whatever are going to hear the sound at the same time they're seeing it with their eyes. Like that kind of delay is not going to be a huge impediment to enjoying the visual aspect of the show. So I was blown away by this. And so I started looking, and I have that the Mackie, the 32, the S32 mixer, I think that's what it's called. And I looked in the main outs, and sure enough, there is a delay there that you can just add. And I checked the other mixers, I checked the Midas stuff. They've all got these. On the Mackie one, you can set the number of milliseconds, but even better, you can set the distance, and it calculates the milliseconds for you. And so I started thinking, wait a minute, I know how to do this. So here's the tip. With your iPhone has that Measure app. You might see where this is going. With the Measure app, you use your phone's camera and its gyroscopes and all like the other, smarts and guts in there. You point it at one spot and drop an anchor, and then you aim the camera to another spot and drop another anchor, and it will tell you the distance between those two things. And so what I will do at upcoming gigs is I will drop an anchor at my snare drum. I will then draw up that line to the front of the stage and drop that anchor, see what that distance is, and then I will plug that in to that distance into the mixer, and it will calculate and apply the delay, and boom, sound will be even better than it has been. So there's my tip from that one. I promise tips from other episodes hopefully won't be quite as long-winded, but that was my favorite one. I'm really stoked about it. Back on Gig Gab 420, we had our friend Chris Breen on, and he's the one who talked about how the guy had an issue, like literally ruptured his eardrum on stage. And from Chris, we learned that reading the room is important, but reading the stage is equally as important. And Chris, as I mentioned during that episode, he is really good at reading what's happening on stage and knowing when to call for a break to maybe help have a conversation or separate people, let everybody cool off, come back, finish the gig. So thank you for that, Chris. Mike Schulte on Gig Gab 421 and then again on Gig Gab 428. The value... he has a lot of great lessons, and he's coming back, of course. The value of having a splitter snake or a custom loom made to make your setup easier is definitely a theme from Mike, because it's made his life so much easier. So if you're playing enough gigs where that makes sense, and maybe even if you're not yet, investing in one of those might be the difference in terms of upping your overall setup time, or decreasing your setup time, which then can help increase your quality of the performance, because you're not all freaked out from setting up and then just having to rush and play. And then maybe that's what helps get you the better gigs. And then yes, I know Mike also started teaching us the value of some gigs using electronic drums, but we'll see about that. Actually, I wound up doing a rehearsal with E-drums, two rehearsals actually with E-drums recently. And the Roland One set was the VAD drums that Mike mentioned, and another was the Roland V drums. So the VADs are the ones that look like acoustic shells, but are in fact electronics. And then the regular V drums look absolutely like they're just electronic pads. But they, the snare drum feels great. My one complaint about even today's, well, I haven't tried the ones that Dan East mentioned that he saw, F notes. I haven't tried the F notes yet. But my complaint about all of the E-drums, like the high quality, latest model E-drums that I've played, is the hi-hat. The ride cymbal, fine. Crash is fine. The toms, the snare, like really good at feeling like I'm playing a drum set. Hi-hat, disaster. The pedal doesn't feel right. The playing it doesn't feel right. Every single E-kit that I sit down at, the levels, like if somebody else has played it before me, the levels of like the snare, the kick, the toms, the all the other cymbals, let's say they're at 0 or even -1 or -2 on like the little volume sliders. The hi-hat's always at +6, +8, +10. Why is it that they can't make this thing feel like a hi-hat to play? That is the next great frontier in electronic drums. So, yeah. So there you go. Let's see. What else did we learn recently? We had Bob Vos on the most recent episode. He's the guy who sings in Fortune, and he wound up singing with the members of Boston and those tribute shows that he did. The value of keeping a band together for 30 plus years, that's impressive, man. So, and I know that like that whole band really works to make that happen. So I'm impressed with that. Matt Musty, drummer from Train that we had on Gig Gab 426. There'll be more to come from him too. We'll kind of debrief with him after the tour. We'll find out how he likes mixing his own ears on stage. So, and some other things. But one of the things I want to talk with him about, because I want to learn more about it, is, how he got that gig. Now, he talked about how he wound up with Grace Potter and sort of, or that he did wind up with Grace Potter and then sort of use that to leverage several other things in his life, but including getting, more high profile gigs. But as I went through this process myself recently, reaching out to musician friends, and one of them, believe it or not, was Bob Vos, right? So I just met Bob a couple of weeks ago, sent him a note. We talked about like drummers, like post show and stuff. And I sent him a note. I'm like, hey, I am looking for a thing. If you know of anybody. 3 days later, I get a call from somebody who was like, hey, I was at a Fortune gig, a private party this weekend, and asked their lead singer if they knew of any drummers. It's like, okay, so this is like using your network is like absolutely a good thing. But I started thinking, well, wait a minute. Not that I want to go out on the road and kind of do that again, at least not right now. And I don't know if I will ever be at a point where I would happily go, like if Bitter Pill was going to do a 2 or 3 week tour, I would happily do that. But, to change my life to be a touring drummer, that's not in the cards right now. Will it ever be again? I don't know. But if I wanted it to be, why not, in addition to reaching out to all the local musicians, why not reach out to the Matt Musties and the Robert Scovilles and the Brad Maddixes of the world that I know and other people like that, and throw your hat in the ring into that ring. Why not? And I think the answer is there is no answer. Do it. If that's where you want to go, just think a little bit bigger. And that was a lesson I got certainly from Matt Musty. So let's all bear that in mind. We set our own limitations, folks, and I know we all know that, but bear that in mind. And I think the other thing that we learned from Matt was, in addition to thinking bigger, is make sure that you are always good to hang with, because as I talk to some of these folks who are kind of on these, bigger tours, higher profile gigs, more people coming to the shows, all that stuff, the common thread is, oh yeah, well, I like being on a crew or in a band with that person because they're a good hang. Now, the fact that they can do their job is table stakes. Like you're a good musician, you're a good engineer, like whatever the job is that you're hired for, that you can do that job. But there's a lot of people that can do that job. You got to be a good hang. You got to be chill at the right times. You got to solve problems at the right times. And so that was another thing that Matt sort of embodied as he was telling us about all that, which I thought was good. We learned from Best Not Broken to not podcast from your bicycle. Folks, I'm sorry about that. That was not the best sounding podcast I've ever released in my life, was it? I was shocked when they first showed up, and like one of the guys was in his car, which isn't a terrible recording environment, right? Like that, your car's, it's generally carpeted, and there's not a lot of parallel reflective surfaces, so you don't start getting all those square waves or anything, and it doesn't sound like you're in a basketball. And but the other guy was literally, when we started, he was literally riding his bike down the streets of Nashville, like downtown Nashville. And we were like, hey, can you do anything about the background noise? And his first comment was, oh, you can hear that? Like, oh yeah, because it's there, like it was, I do have like a little thing that I send to people that says, use wired headphones, use a wired microphone, be in a quiet environment if you can, this, that, and the other thing. And, I guess it just lands differently. But they did have some interesting stories to tell. So I was glad to have them on the show. But yeah, the sound thing is interesting. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it was easy enough to listen to that you got some value out of it. And then we learned a lot from Adam Moskowizard. Which I'll sum up as always be innovating. In fact, Adam has some other tips and tricks to add here to our episode in a little bit. All right, folks, today's episode is brought to you and all of us by our friends at Bandzoogle. If your band's website is stuck in the 90s, it's time for a serious upgrade. Listen, we've used Bandzoogle for our band Fling for years, and it's so flexible that as Fling has sort of transformed, we were able to use Bandzoogle to transform the website into Fling Rocks Records, which is now showcasing multiple projects seamlessly. The transition was simple. Russ was able to do it in an afternoon. With Bandzoogle, building a stunning website is as easy as hitting the right chord. Dozens of fully customizable templates? Check. Tools to sell music, merch, and tickets commission-free? Check. They've got all the industry-ready EPK features, smart links, custom landing pages, and even mailing list tools to keep your fans in the loop. Plus, social media integrations make it a breeze to connect all your online profiles. And if you hit a snag, their award-winning support team is there 7 days a week. Website plans start at just $8.29 a month, and that includes hosting and your own custom domain name. It's like having your own tech roadie on call. I know. Ready to rock your online presence, folks? Well, head to bandzoogle.com to try it free for 30 days and then use the promo code giggabpod to get 15% off your first year. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code giggabpod. Get your band's website singing in harmony today, and our thanks to Bandzoogle for sponsoring this episode. All right, so that was our debrief from the guests, and I mentioned I had something more from Adam Moskowitz. But before we get into that, send me your notes, feedback at giggabpodcast.com or any of the other places that you can find us. Which guests did you like? What did you like from them? What would you have liked from them that I didn't have them talk about or that they chose not to talk about? Either one. And are there other guests that you think would be good for the show? Would you be a good guest for the show? Folks like Adam and Mike Schulte and Dan East. Dan's actually coming on. We're going to go do a deep dive on in-ears next week. And I guarantee you, Dan and I are going to disagree with each other vehemently. But there'll be good information, I promise. But several folks started out as listeners to the show and still are. We're all part of this family here. So if you've got something to add absolutely let me know. And I know, like, I'm already in talks with some of you already to have you on in this sort of next wave of shows that we're in the process of booking and recording and all that here. So let me know. Would love to. I want this. This is our show, right? This is our community here. So let me know what works for you, what you want, and we'll have some fun with it. So Adam sent me an email, as he often does, and he says, and this is absolutely going to be controversial. I love it. He says, I'm sure you've heard of and played around with Suno, SUNO, which is an AI song generation engine. Okay. So, yep, there's your, if you want to hate AI for everything, then now this is the segment of the episode for you to do that. He says, I had the idea a few days ago to use it to create an intro theme song for when Vam Band takes the stage. And that got me exploring the idea of Suno and what it's capable of with different style of music and different prompts, as any of us who have used the generative AI engines for anything, text, images, the prompt is the key, right? And he says, so check out these 2 examples that I sent you of a theme song for Gig Gab. And he says, it's pretty freaking amazing when you're a musician that knows the time and effort it takes to craft a song from scratch, write the lyrics, arrange the music, pay money to go into the studio, record all those parts, mix, master. He says, it's blowing my mind that I type in a musical prompt and less than 30 seconds later, a fully fleshed, great sounding song is created from nothing. What a time to be alive. So he has a couple of examples here. The prompt that he used was make a TV show style intro theme song for Gig Gab, a weekly podcast for working musicians hosted by Dave Hamilton. Always be performing, gig life, playing concerts, acoustic funky rock. So that's the prompt. Probably not the best prompt, but here's there's 2 versions of this song, and the first one is, well, it's kind of like an 80s ballad.
Always be performing. That's the way to live. Gig life, working musicians, come on, let's give. Dave Hamilton is the host, leading the show, talking about a life on the road. Let's go, playing concerts every night, feeling the groove, acoustic melodies, funky rock, it'll move. Join us on the airwaves, every week's a blast. Gig Gab is here, the podcast that'll last. Gig Gab, come on and take a listen. Working musician, sharing wisdom and ambition. Let the music guide you, feel it in your soul. Gig life is the goal, let's rock and roll.
Yeah. All right. So that and that was that. No tweaks to the lyrics yet or anything like that. No further transformations to the initial output. Here's one that's more kind of 90s reggae rock sort of ish.
Always be performing, that's the way to live. Gig life, working musicians, come on, let's give. Dave Hamilton is the host, leading the show, talking about a life on the road. Let's go, playing concerts every night, feeling the groove, acoustic melodies, funky rock, it'll move. Join us on the airwaves, every week's a blast. Gig Gab is here, the podcast that'll last. Gig Gab, come on and take a listen. Working musicians, sharing wisdom and ambition. Let the music guide you, feel it in your soul.
Ooh.
Gig life is the goal, let's rock and roll.
All right, that little hook, like there's something there. That's not bad. All right, and then he did do some lyric edits to kind of clean things up, and as often happens with generative AIs, when you have it make a tweak to one little thing, it changes other parts wholesale. So here's another lyric edit that starts to get into like a gospel Jason Mraz kind of thing.
Always be performing, that's the way to live. Gig life, working musicians. We give it all we got to give. Dave Hamilton is the host, leading the show, talking about life on the road. Let's go! Playing concerts all the time, feeling the groove. Very awesome music always makes you move. Join us on the airwaves, every week's a blast.
So you can see where it's going. He had one last one that I do want to share, this like kind of 90s horn rock version that, again, came from a lyric transformation. And here we go.
Always be performing, that's the way to live. Gig life, working musicians, we give it all we got to give. Dave Hamilton is the host, leading the show, talking about life on the road. Let's go. Playing concerts all the time, feeling the groove. Very awesome music always makes you move. Join us on the airwaves, every week's a blast. Gig Gab is here, the podcast that'll last. Gig Gab, come on and take a listen. Work musicians, sharing wisdom and ambition. Let the music guide you.
So that's Suno, S-U-N-O. I don't think we're going to use any of those theme songs, but I get like there were hooky things part of these. I have found I haven't used AI to do any music like audio generation yet, but I have done it for text generation and image generation. Many of the images that you see for the episode images for this show and the other shows that I do are AI generated. I mean, the ones that are pictures of me and the guest, obviously not so much, but otherwise, yeah, it is. I used Shutterstock for a while, but the problem with Shutterstock was I couldn't really get exactly what I wanted in the time that I wanted to get it done. Like I finished the show, I got to publish it, within 30 minutes or so. So and I don't know what the title or the vibe is going to be until after I finish recording, because who knows where the conversations are going to go. So I have used it for that, and it's what I find, especially with text, and I think I'm already sort of realizing I'm approaching and reacting to the audio generation the same way, is that it gives me ideas to then work with. What I do, if you look at the show notes for Gig Gab, you'll see there's a list of all the things we talked about with the timestamps and chapters and all that stuff. That I create live while I'm recording, right? By and large. I mean, I might go in and flesh it out a little bit, but that's all created live. I take that and feed it in to ChatGPT and say, hey, take these chapters and write me a 2-paragraph blog post in the second person. I've got some parameters because I've learned, and I'll have this little shortcut that just pops the parameters out, and then it writes that, and I'd say maybe 60-50% of the time I read it through and it's like, actually spot on. That's all. We're good to go. But an equal amount of the time I see it, it's like, okay, I need to edit this. But as I know is true for many of us, I find it way easier to edit than I do to just write out of whole cloth. So it's really helpful for that. And I can see where, kind of a tool to help give ideas and feedback and that sort of thing, and sort of avoid or get over the hump of writer's block in various shapes and forms can be great. So thank you for sharing that, Adam. I love that. I also found out, I mentioned that I'm playing with a bunch of different bands. My friend Dave Nicodemus is the bass player in this band. I think they're called Sugar Bush, perhaps named after the ski mountain here in Vermont. I don't know. But I'm playing playing a gig with them in a few weeks here. And he sent me a list of it's a cover gig, sent me a list of all the tunes that they're playing and sent me Spotify links for all of them. It was an Excel spreadsheet, Google Sheet or whatever. It's great. Okay, fine. I was like, oh man, I'd love to build a Spotify playlist of this, because then, makes it easier to just kind of listen to and learn by osmosis in the car. I already know most of the songs on the list, which is obviously helpful, but there's some, and even if I know them, like, it's good getting them into my bones and my brain and kind of refreshing on them. Like, I'd love to just have this to listen to. And I thought, well, let me try something. So from the Excel spreadsheet, I just copied, selected all of the Spotify links, copied it, went into the Spotify app on my Mac, created a new playlist, an empty playlist, and I hit paste. And yep, it worked. It fleshed out the entire list with all of the things from the playlist. So I got the exact versions that he gave. If there was one that was a live version versus the studio version or whatever, I got it because it's there. And it didn't take me 20 minutes to search for song by song. Okay, that one. Okay, add it. Yep. No, not that version. Not that band. Not this cover of it. No, got it. Get it right. It really made a difference. So try that the next time somebody sends you a list of Spotify links, Spotify URLs, because it can make a huge difference. So if you know of any tips like this, tools, online tools that are helpful in your music life, send them in. feedback@giggabpodcast.com. I definitely like to share this stuff because we all get to learn together, and that is the best part. All right. Speaking of learning together, listener Mike sent in a note about a podcast, a specific episode of this podcast, but really this is a recommendation for this podcast in general. And he says, if you've never listened, or if you've gotten out of the habit of listening to the podcast Strong Songs, the most recent episode goes over the Fish song, Limb by Limb. That's the name of the song, not how the podcast goes through it. This is a fantastic Fish song. It's like, and he goes through the studio version, which is, I would agree, the best version of that song. It is... The song is super dense and has a lot to dissect, which is likely why I believe his name is Kirk Hamilton, the host of Strong Songs, chose that song, and he goes through some other reasons why he chose it. But this guy, he's a trained musician. Technically, I think he says I forget what he said his primary instrument is, like trombone or something, but he plays the guitar parts, he plays piano parts on this, he plays the bass parts, and he transcribed and then I think sequenced the drum part for this. And this is no simple drum part. Like, I still don't understand how to play this particular drum part in Limb by Limb. It's this whole Afro-Cuban inspired thing that has polyrhythms happening on different limbs, and the drum part is limb by limb, even though the song is also called Limb by Limb. It's crazy. And he transcribed and then dissects every aspect of the song, and he's entertaining. The way that he does it, it's not super boring. He's very engaging, talks you through some of the sort of more nerdy musical things that are happening, but again, without making you fall asleep. He keeps it engaging, and this was a great episode to listen to, but I have now queued up many, many more episodes of Strong Songs here. So I think if you're listening to this show, you're going to love Strong Songs. So just go pick any episode. I'll link to the Limb by Limb one. But if you're going to listen to the Limb by Limb episode and you've never heard that song before, go listen to the studio version of Limb by Limb first. Then let him dissect it for you. Because I think coming in, it would be helpful to kind of have a bird's eye view of what's happening. So, but otherwise, pick any song, go through his list and pick something that you already know or that interests you, or that you have some affinity with, and start there would be my advice. But my ask for you, because I told you I was going to have an ask for each segment of this today, is please send in to feedback@giggabpodcast.com what other podcasts you are listening to. We like to share. We know, I certainly know that this isn't the only podcast anyone would listen to. That'd be ridiculous. I think at the most recent podcast upfronts, I was down in New York for those. They said that it's gone up. The average podcast listener listens to 9 episodes a week now. That's up from 6 like 2 years ago. So, if I'm not putting out 9 episodes a week, well, you got to listen to other stuff. But you would want to listen to other stuff anyway. You get sick and tired of hearing just from me. So, I want to share what other shows you are listening to. Because of that, it's good for us to just be aware of other good stuff that like similarly minded people like. But then also, like happened with Dallas Taylor from 20,000 Hertz, maybe there's a good reason to, have a crossover thing like we've done with the Cover Band Confidential guys or Steve Witchell from Cover Band Central, or like we had with Dallas Taylor. He was a guest on the show, and it was a great chat that we had. So lots of reasons why it would be good. Feedback at giggabpodcast.com. Tell me what you are listening to. Time for some Gear Gab. The folks at Earthworks sent me a couple of things. Today we are talking about one of them because I like to kind of give each one a little bit of space here. But that is the Earthworks SR117. This is a condenser microphone that is built for, they call it a vocal microphone. It is a supercardioid pattern, so it does have some decent off-axis rejection. I have not used it. I have used it as a vocal microphone on a Monkey Fist gig, which is the acoustic act that I work with. It sounds like me. It felt like me. I've always said, I've used Heil mics for years, the PR31BW primarily for the last 5 years or whatever, and I've always said I like it because it's a dynamic mic that feels like I'm singing into a condenser. I can blend harmonies with it nicely. This mic had all those same qualities for me. I didn't really even have to change my EQ very much, although you're going to hear in this demo that I'm going to do for you that it definitely has its own sort of EQ presence when compared to some other microphones. But so I've used it on my voice. I've used it on Emily's voice at some Bitter Pill rehearsals. It sounds fantastic. So for those, higher register, which is where I tend to sing, or higher register male voices, female voices in that higher, if you're for whatever reason, if you have a voice that kind of sits in that higher register, this microphone will give you a beefier, more full, more well-rounded tone, while still really kind of articulating and bringing out those highs. And as I'm saying these words to you, I now realize why the folks at Earthworks suggested I do what I'm about to tell you about. And that is, they said, try this thing on your snare drum. Now think about what I just said about voices, right? It's good for those higher register things. Still has nice articulation on the top end, but enhances or brings out the richness, the tone that sometimes can get lost when you have that higher register stuff. Well, snare drum. So I get it. So I recorded my Black Beauty here in the studio this morning with the SM57 that I have had on it for, however long I've had, probably since I set up my drums this way during COVID lockdowns, right? And then I tried this SR117 on it. The SR117, by the way, is $199 on Amazon right now, $199 US on Amazon right now. So certainly, we're not talking about it being some $1,000 microphone or anything like that. It is an affordable mic in my opinion. It is a condenser mic, so it requires phantom power. But thankfully, I already had phantom power on the block of XLR inputs that I use for my drums because I have overhead mics that require phantom power. So that was already there. And so here is the SM57. We'll call this the baseline. This is the Black Beauty. This is non-EQ'd. So you're hearing just the mic and the dry mic, no reverb, no EQ, a little bit of compression just to kind of keep everything tame and to allow us to hear it. But the podcast is going to go through compression anyway. So it's better actually to give it a more sort of balanced signal. But that was it. And this mic is soloed. So while there are other mics on the kit, we are only hearing the signal from, at this point, the SM57 on the Black Beauty. That's got a little bit of a low, 300 hertz kind of ring, if you want, that you'd probably tune out if you were putting this in the mains. But think about this both in terms of recording and which mic would you want to record with, but also which mic would you want to use live, because it's not always the same. Okay, so that was the SM57. Here comes the Earthworks SR117. Back to this SM57. Back to the SR117. All right. So upon first listen, I was like, oh, I like the 57 better. Because it's not EQ'd, right? And that's the right way to test a mic, I think. And of course, the SR117 is pulling out this, kind of the tone, the thick, the muddy, or if you want to call it that, parts of the snare, the beefier parts of the snare. Certainly that could be EQ'd out. I don't know that I would use this for recording a snare drum, because I generally am going to get that beefiness elsewhere. However, live, I can see where this would be the right microphone to use for a live scenario, and how you might really come to like it, similar to how I've come to like the Telefunken M80. In fact, I might like this even better than that Telefunken M80 in a live scenario for exactly that reason, because you're getting some of that beef in your ears, and in the mains, right? So you've got something that's actually moving some air and not just all sparkle and sizzle on the top end. So yeah, fascinating mic, and I look forward to checking out more from them. What gear I'm podcasting currently into an Earthworks Ethos mic, which is also a condenser mic that I thought I would never use, but I have been now for the last 2 years, something like that. So yeah, I've learned to trust the folks at Earthworks when they say, try this, we think you're going to like it, because they understand my ears. So yeah. But yeah, there you go. Good. I'm absolutely happy to have this mic in my arsenal. I think there would be nights where I would want two of them, one to put on the snare for front of house and one to put on like a vocal. Again, I need to test it for a drum vocal to see how it does for off-axis rejection. But certainly, on a vocal kind of, downstage or whatever, for that right voice, for a voice like mine, or like I said on Emily, it sounded great too. So wasn't my preference on John Donahue, Johnny D as I call him, who sings in Monkey Fist. I like him on something a little bit different, but he's got a different voice. So there you go. What gear are you using? Feedback at giggabpodcast.com. That's what I want to know, because that way we get to all share and learn. And feel free to send in audio demos if that makes sense with the gear. Obviously, if it's like a clamp or a stand, well, you don't need an audio demo. But yeah, if you want to have some fun with it, have some fun. We'll share it on the show here, like we did with the things I made this morning, and then also the Suno stuff that Adam sent in. Every time I do one of these solo episodes, I start it and tell myself, you don't have to release it, Dave, if it sucks. And that's really the only way that I get started, because I'm always super nervous about doing one of these. And here we are an hour in, and I don't think it sucked. So I'm going to release it. If you disagree with me, you feel free to disagree and let me know. But if you agree that it didn't suck, I would love it if my final ask, as it were, it's a request, is share the show. Pick 5 musician friends. Start with 1. I'd like you to get to 5, but start with 1 and just tell them, hey, there's this show Gig Gab. I just listened to an episode with, this guy who's had a band for 30 years, or the guy who's doing the sound for Kenny Chesney and did Tom Petty, or the drummer from Train, or this solo episode that the hosted and talked about these things, and I think you'd love it. Find somebody in your life, a musician, a music fan, whatever it might be, and share the show with them. I would very much appreciate that. I especially appreciate you listening, and traffic is like downloads and stuff are up this year, which is great. More importantly, your feedback keeps coming in, and that is really the fuel that certainly keeps me going. It's awesome to be able to do this. I am so happy that I found a way to continue doing this once Paul didn't have time for it anymore, because this helps warm my heart, and you are all a part. We are all a part of that together. So let's keep warming each other's hearts, folks. Share the show, and have fun out there. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Keep on playing. Don't set your limitations where you want them to be. I was going to say don't limit yourself, but figure out where you want to limit yourself, and always be performing. I'll see you next week. Later.